Marriage was supposed to be a sacred bond. For Arturo Montague, it was a multi-million-pound shield against a treacherous uncle. He bought a destitute bride, expecting silence and submission. Instead, he brought a hurricane into his ancestral home, a woman who would tear his frozen heart apart. London, 1888. Rain lashed against the towering windows of the Montague estate in Mayfair, matching the bitter tempest brewing inside the study. Arturo Montague, the 9th Duke of Harrington, stared at the sprawling parchment on his mahogany desk. He was 29 years old, possessing a fortune that could buy half of England, yet he was entirely cornered by the ink of a dead man. His late father's will contained a draconian ironclad clause. If Arturo did not wed before his 30th birthday, the entirety of the Harrington Trust, including his beloved railway expansions, the shipping fleets in Liverpool, and the ancestral estates, would be placed into a conservatorship, managed by his uncle, Lord Benedict Montague. Benedict was a notorious gambler, a snake wrapped in tailored silk, who had already bankrupted 2 subsidiary estates. Handing him the Harrington fortune was akin to setting it on fire. Arturo had exactly 3 weeks to find a duchess. It does not matter who she is. Josiah Arturo said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded immediate obedience. He poured himself a glass of amber scotch, not bothering to offer one to his solicitor. She merely needs to be of respectable lineage, possess a pulse, and most importantly, be entirely willing to sign a prenuptial agreement that strips her of any operational power over my assets. I want a ghost, a woman who will wear the tiara, attend the necessary galas, and stay out of my way. Josiah Higgins, a small, nervous man with ink-stained fingers, adjusted his spectacles. Your Grace, I believe I have found the perfect candidate. Her name is Beatrina Fairchild, daughter of Baron Thomas Fairchild. Arturo raised an eyebrow. Fairchild, the man who lost his entire portfolio in the City of Glasgow Bank collapse. Precisely, Josiah nodded. The Baron is drowning in debt, over £80,000 in arrears. Creditors are threatening to seize their final property, a modest cottage in Sussex. Miss Beatrina has a younger sister, Clara, who suffers from a severe respiratory illness, requiring expensive coastal air and medical attention. Miss Beatrina is desperate. She is 21, exceptionally well educated, but utterly without prospects due to her father's ruin. If you pay off the Baron's debts and provide a generous allowance for the sister's medical care, she will agree to any terms you set. Arturo swirled the scotch in his glass, his ice-blue eyes calculating the investment. £80,000 was pocket change to secure an empire worth millions. Set up a meeting. 2 days later, Beatrina Fairchild stepped into the opulent library of the Duke's Mayfair residence. She wore a faded navy blue day dress, 5 years out of fashion, but she carried herself with the spine of a queen. Arturo observed her from the shadows by the fireplace. She wasn't classically beautiful, in the fragile porcelain way preferred by high society. She had sharp cheekbones, piercing hazel eyes, and thick chestnut hair pulled into a severe knot. There was no tremble in her hands, no awe in her gaze, as she looked upon the priceless Renaissance tapestries adorning his walls. Miss Fairchild, Arturo stepped forward, offering no smile. Your Grace, she replied, her voice steady, melodic, but strictly professional. Arturo did not believe in wasting time. He laid the contract on the table between them. I assume Mr. Higgins has explained the nature of this arrangement. I am purchasing your hand to satisfy a legal nuisance. In exchange, your father's debts vanish by tomorrow morning. Your sister will be moved to a premier sanatorium in Switzerland, with all expenses paid. You will receive a personal allowance of £5,000 a year. You will have the title The Protection of my name, and a permanent residence at Harrington Manor in Yorkshire. Beatrina looked at the towering man before her. He was strikingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features and broad shoulders, tailored perfectly into a charcoal suit, but his eyes were entirely devoid of warmth. He looked at her not as a woman, but as a column on a ledger. "And what are my obligations, Your Grace, she asked, refusing to break eye contact. "You will be my wife in name. You will accompany me to social functions when required to present a united front to my uncle. Beyond that, I expect nothing from you, and you shall expect nothing from me. There will be no romance, no interference in my business. You will live your life in Yorkshire, and I will primarily reside here in London. Do we understand one another?" Beatrina's chest tightened. She was selling her life, her future, and any hope of love to an absolute glacier of a man. But the image of her sister Clara, coughing blood into a linen handkerchief, flashed in her mind. She picked up the fountain pen. "I require one addition, Your Grace. The funds for my sister's care must be placed in an independent trust, inaccessible to my father or your estate, guaranteeing her lifetime care regardless of our marriage's future." Arturo paused, a flicker of surprise crossing his stoic face. She was negotiating. How delightfully audacious. Done. She signed her name. Beatrina Fairchild ceased to exist. In the eyes of the law, she was now the property of the Duke of Harrington. The wedding took place a week later at St. George's, Hanover Square. It was a bleak, overcast Tuesday. There were no flowers, no triumphant organ music, and no joyful tears. Beatrina wore a simple ivory gown salvaged from her late mother's trunk. As they stood before the vicar, Arturo's presence was a heavy, suffocating weight beside her. When the time came to seal the vows, Arturo leaned down his lips, briefly brushing her cold cheek, a gesture so devoid of affection it felt more like a brand than a kiss. Outside, the church reporters and high society gossips clustered their whispers like hissing snakes. Why would the wealthiest duke in England marry a bankrupt baron's daughter? Arturo handed her into the waiting carriage. "Your train to Yorkshire departs in an hour. Mr. Higgins will escort you. I must return to the city to finalize the railway contracts. Good day, Duchess." Before she could respond, the carriage door snapped shut, leaving Beatrina alone in the velvet darkness. She had saved her family, but as the carriage rattled over the cobblestones, a profound, chilling loneliness settled into her bones. She was a duchess, yet she had never felt more like a prisoner. Harrington Manor was a sprawling Gothic behemoth of grey stone, set against the wild, windswept moors of Yorkshire. It was intimidating, magnificent, and entirely empty. For the first 2 months of her marriage, Beatrina did not see her husband once. Arturo remained in London, fighting legal battles and expanding his empire content to leave his new bride locked away in his northern fortress. Most women of her station would have spent their days embroidering, reading French poetry, or gossiping with the local gentry. Beatrina was not most women. Raised by a father who treated his estate like a casino, Beatrina had secretly learned the art of mathematics and ledgers in a desperate, failed attempt to save her family from ruin. Boredom gnawed at her in the vast halls of Harrington Manor. Seeking purpose, she began spending her afternoons in the estate's dusty archives, befriending the elderly head housekeeper, Mrs. Croft, and the head groom. It didn't take long for her to notice the discrepancies. The estate was bleeding money. Tenant farmers were being evicted for missed payments, yet the manor's ledgers showed record grain harvests. Maintenance funds for the southern cottages were completely unaccounted for. Beatrina requested the master account books from Mr. Grimsby, the estate manager. Grimsby, a greasy, condescending man who had served Arturo's uncle before being stationed in Yorkshire, sneered at her request. "These are matters of business," Your Grace, Grimsby had said, a patronizing smile on his thin lips, hardly suitable for a lady's delicate constitution. Beatrina had simply stared at him. "Bring me the ledgers, Mr. Grimsby, or I shall have the footman dismantle your office door and retrieve them myself. Choose." Within a week, sitting by the fire in the Duke's private study, Beatrina untangled a massive web of embezzlement. Grimsby was siphoning thousands of pounds from the tenant revenues and funneling them directly into shadow accounts held by Lord Benedict Montague. Arturo's uncle wasn't just waiting for the Duke to fail. He was actively sabotaging the Duke's primary agricultural holdings from the inside, hoping to depreciate the estate's value and force a board inquiry. Beatrina drafted a meticulous 40-page report, cross-referencing every stolen shilling. On a stormy Friday evening in November, Arturo arrived at Harrington Manor unannounced. He was exhausted. A strike at the Liverpool docks had cost him a fortune, and Benedict was pressing the Board of Trustees for an audit of Arturo's northern estates, claiming gross mismanagement. Arturo had ridden north to personally inspect the damage. He strode into his manor, shrugging off a soaking wet greatcoat, expecting the usual dreary silence. Instead, he heard voices echoing from his private study. Arturo pushed the heavy oak doors open to a shocking sight. His supposedly docile, invisible wife was standing behind his mahogany desk. Mr. Grimsby was seated before her, sweating profusely, his face pale as milk. "You have falsified the spring oat yields by 30%. Beatrina was saying, her voice cold and sharp as a polished blade. "You evicted the Miller family on the grounds of insolvency, yet I have the bank receipt showing they paid their rent in full to you personally. You are a thief, Mr. Grimsby, and a remarkably sloppy one." "Your Grace, this is an outrage," Grimsby sputtered, leaping to his feet. He caught sight of Arturo in the doorway, and his eyes widened in panic. "Your Grace, the Duchess has lost her mind. She has broken into my private files." Arturo stepped into the room, the heavy doors clicking shut behind him. The air in the room instantly dropped 10 degrees. He looked at Grimsby, then shifted his gaze to Beatrina. She did not flinch. She simply picked up a stack of papers and held them out. "He is stealing from you," Beatrina said, her hazel eyes locking onto Arturo's. "Nearly £12,000 this year alone. And the paper trail leads directly to your uncle's holding company in London." Arturo slowly walked forward. He ignored Grimsby entirely, taking the papers from his wife's hands. His eyes scanned the immaculate handwriting, the flawless mathematical deductions, the irrefutable evidence of fraud. His chest tightened, a strange electric jolt hitting his heart. He had married this woman expecting a silent ghost. Instead, he had married a strategist. "Is this true, Grimsby?" Arturo asked softly, his tone deadly. "My lord, she doesn't understand the complexities of pack." "Your belongings," Arturo interrupted, not raising his voice, yet commanding the room entirely. "You have 1 hour to leave my property. If I ever see your face in Yorkshire again, or if you ever contact my uncle, I will have you thrown into the Thames with an anvil chained to your ankle. Get out." Grimsby scrambled out of the room like a frightened rat. Arturo and Beatrina were left alone. The fire cracked in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across Arturo's sharp jawline. He looked down at the woman standing before him. She was breathing heavily, a slight flush on her cheeks. From the adrenaline, her chin tilted defiantly upward. She was breathtaking. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "You went through my private ledgers," Arturo said, his voice dangerously low as he stepped closer. "Someone had to." Beatrina fired back, refusing to step away. "You abandoned your estate to a snake. You promised to protect my family, Arturo. If your uncle bankrupts you, my sister loses her care, I will not allow your blind spot for your staff to jeopardize my sister's life." It was the first time she had used his Christian name. It sent a shiver down his spine. He closed the distance between them, standing mere inches away. He was a foot taller than her, a towering presence of masculine authority, but she held her ground. "You are not what I bargained for, Beatrina," he murmured, his eyes dropping briefly to her lips before snapping back to her defiant gaze. "Then perhaps, your grace, you should have read the fine print." Before Arturo could process the sheer, terrifying thrill racing through his veins, the heavy doors swung open again. "Arturo, darling, what a dreadfully dreary place you've locked yourself away in." Arturo stiffened. Standing in the doorway, flanked by a smirking Lord Benedict Montague, was Lady Genevieve. She was the daughter of an earl draped in emerald velvet, exuding malicious glamour. She was the woman Benedict had originally tried to force Arturo to marry, and she had never forgiven Arturo for choosing a pauper over her. Benedict stepped forward, a patronizing smile on his aging face. "Arturo, my boy." We heard rumors of distress at Harrington Manor. As a trustee, I felt it my duty to inspect the grounds. And look, we've interrupted you and the little Baron's daughter. Genevieve laughed, a high, delicate sound meant to wound. "Indeed. Tell me, your grace." She looked Beatrina up and down with mocking pity. How does one adjust from begging for scraps in Sussex to wandering these giant halls? "Do you get lost often?" Arturo's jaw clenched. A protective fury, primal and violent, flared in his chest. He opened his mouth to eviscerate them both, but Beatrina stepped around the desk, her expression perfectly composed, a regal, lethal smile playing on her lips. Lady Genevieve, Beatrina said smoothly, her voice echoing with aristocratic authority. "I do not get lost at all. In fact, I have become quite familiar with every hidden corner of this estate, including the rats that attempt to feast on its foundations. Lord Benedict, I am so glad you are here. We have a great deal of missing tenant funds to discuss." Arturo watched his wife, utterly mesmerized. The cold, impenetrable fortress he had built around his heart for 29 years suddenly began to crack. Silence fell over the study, thick and suffocating. Lord Benedict's patronizing smile vanished, replaced by a dark, ugly sneer. Lady Genevieve's mocking laughter died in her throat as she stared at the damning ledger in Beatrina's steady hand. "You insolent little girl," Benedict hissed, dropping the facade of the concerned uncle. He took a threatening step toward Beatrina. "You have no idea what you are meddling in. These are men's affairs. One forged ledger will not save my nephew from his own incompetence." Arturo moved with the terrifying speed of a striking viper. Before Benedict's boot could hit the carpet fully, Arturo was there, placing himself squarely between his wife and his uncle. He did not yell. He did not raise his fists. He simply stared down at the older man with eyes as cold and unforgiving as the North Sea. "Take another step toward my Duchess, Benedict, and I will not bother with the magistrates." Arturo's voice was a lethal whisper. "I will bury you under the moors myself." He reached back his large, warm hand, finding the small of Beatrina's back. It was the first time he had willingly touched her since their wedding day. The heat of his palm seared through the silk of her dress, sending a jolt of electricity straight to her heart. It was a gesture of absolute possession and unyielding protection. "You have overplayed your hand," Arturo Benedict sneered, though he wisely took a step backward. "You think marrying this penniless beggar secures your father's empire? There is a clause in the Harrington Trust regarding the validity of the union. A marriage unconsummated, existing only on paper, is a fraud against the crown and the estate. I have eyes everywhere. You sleep in the East Wing, and she sleeps in the West. I will see you ruined at the Christmas gala before the Board of Trustees." Benedict turned on his heel, grabbing Genevieve by the arm, and stormed out of the manor, the heavy oak doors slamming behind them. The echo faded, leaving Arturo and Beatrina alone once more. Arturo did not remove his hand from her waist. In fact, his grip tightened slightly, pulling her a fraction of an inch closer. "You are shaking, Arturo," noted his voice, losing its icy edge, softening into something dangerously intimate. "I am furious, Your Grace," Beatrina corrected, looking up into his striking face. "He intends to destroy everything you have built, and he intends to use the nature of our arrangement to do it." Arturo sighed finally, stepping back and running a hand through his dark hair. "My father's will was archaic. Benedict is right about one thing. The Board of Trustees men like Lord Westbourne and the Duke of Westminster are traditionalists. If Benedict can prove our marriage is a sham business transaction, he can petition the courts to annul the union and seize the conservatorship. Then we must not let him prove it," Beatrina said resolutely. For the next 2 months, Arturo did not return to London. Instead, he remained at Harrington Manor. To the outside world, the Duke and Duchess were enjoying a secluded romantic winter in Yorkshire. Inside the manor, they were preparing for war. They spent their days locked in the study, poring over financial records, rebuilding the estate's infrastructure, and tracing Benedict's embezzlement through a labyrinth of shell companies in Grosvenor Square. But it was the evenings that shifted the tectonic plates of their arrangement. They began dining together. The massive 20-foot mahogany dining table felt too ridiculous, so Arturo ordered dinner, served in the library by the fire. Without the armor of high society, they began to talk. Arturo learned of Beatrina's fierce love for her sister Clara and the agonizing guilt she carried over her father's gambling addiction. Beatrina learned that Arturo's coldness was not cruelty, but a shield. He had been raised by a father who viewed emotion as a liability. He had been taught that to love was to give your enemies a target. One evening in early December, a heavy snowstorm trapped them inside. Beatrina was reading a volume of Keats by the fire, her chestnut hair falling loosely over her shoulders. Arturo was watching her from his armchair, a glass of scotch forgotten in his hand. He realized with a sudden terrifying clarity that he was no longer looking at an investment. He was looking at the only woman who had ever truly seen him. "Beatrina," he said softly. She looked up, the firelight dancing in her hazel eyes. "Yes, Arturo, when this is over, when Benedict is defeated and the trust is permanently secured in my name, you are free to go." The words tasted like ash in his mouth, but he forced them out. "I will honor the financial agreement. Clara will be cared for indefinitely. But I will not keep you imprisoned in this marriage." Beatrina's breath hitched. A profound sadness washed over her. She had spent the last 2 months falling deeply, helplessly in love with her husband, but to him this was still a contract. She carefully closed her book. "I see," she whispered, standing up. "Thank you for your generosity, Your Grace. If you will excuse me, I am going to retire." As she walked past him, Arturo's restraint snapped. He reached out, catching her wrist. He stood, pulling her gently but firmly against his chest. His eyes were entirely unguarded, blazing with a desperate, suppressed fire. Unless Arturo murmured, his gaze dropping to her trembling lips, "You wish to stay?" Before she could answer, his mouth crashed down on hers. It was not a hesitant kiss. It was a torrential downpour of years of repressed longing, fear, and ferocious need. Beatrina gasped, her hands flying to his broad shoulders, tangling in his dark hair as she kissed him back with equal fervor. The contract, the arrangement, the debts, they all burned away in the heat of that single breathless moment. But a sudden frantic knocking at the study door tore them apart. It was a telegram from London. Josiah Higgins had been violently assaulted in his office. The safe had been blown open. The original signed prenuptial agreement, the document explicitly stating their marriage was a loveless financial transaction, had been stolen. Benedict had his proof. Winter gripped London with icy fangs on the night of the Board of Trustees gala at the Grand Savoy Hotel. The ballroom was a sea of glittering diamonds, black tailcoats, and ruthless aristocratic ambition. Every major figure of British industry was present, including Lord Westbourne, the head of the Harrington Trust. Beatrina stepped out of the carriage, the freezing wind biting her cheeks. She was dressed not as a pauper's daughter, but as a queen. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk, embroidered with silver threads that caught the gaslight, and at her throat rested the legendary Harrington sapphire, a jewel that had not been worn in 3 generations. Arturo offered her his arm. His jaw was set in granite. "Are you ready?" "We destroy him tonight, Arturo." "Utterly," Beatrina replied, slipping her gloved hand through his arm. They entered the ballroom to a chorus of whispers. As they descended the grand staircase, Benedict was already holding court near the orchestra, a triumphant, venomous smile plastered across his face. Beside him stood a bruised and terrified Josiah Higgins, surrounded by the severe-looking men of the trust board. Benedict did not wait for the music to stop. He wanted a public execution. Arturo Benedict's voice boomed across the marble floor, silencing the room. "How delightful of you to bring your employee to our sacred gathering." The crowd gasped. Lord Westbourne frowned, stepping forward. "Lord Benedict, what is the meaning of this outburst?" "The meaning, Westbourne, is fraud," Benedict declared, pulling a folded piece of parchment from his coat pocket. He waved it in the air like a bloody sword. "My nephew has made a mockery of his late father's will. He did not marry for duty or for love. He purchased this woman to secure the inheritance. I hold here a sworn contract signed by both parties, stating that this is a business arrangement. They share no marital bed. They share no union. Under the bylaws of the trust, this marriage is null and void." Whispers exploded into outright murmurs of shock. Genevieve smirked from the sidelines. Benedict thrust the paper toward Lord Westbourne. Arturo did not panic. He calmly walked toward his uncle, leaving Beatrina's side for just a moment. He took the contract from Lord Westbourne's hesitant hands. Arturo looked down at his own signature, at Beatrina's delicate handwriting. Then, in front of 500 members of London's elite, Arturo tore the contract in half. He tore it again and again, letting the snowy pieces flutter to the polished marble floor. "You fool," Benedict screamed. "The contents are already known. Tearing it up changes nothing." "It changes everything," Arturo said, his baritone voice ringing with absolute, unshakable authority. He turned back to look at Beatrina, his eyes softening into a profound, earth-shattering tenderness that silenced the entire room. "It is true," Arturo addressed the board, but his eyes never left his wife. "I married Beatrina Fairchild under a contract. I sought a woman who would ask nothing of me, who would leave my fortune intact, and who would allow my heart to remain dead and buried." He walked slowly back to her, taking both of her trembling hands in his. "But I was a fool," Arturo continued softly for her ears as much as the room's, "because I brought a hurricane into my home. A woman of such terrifying brilliance, courage and grace that she shattered every wall I ever built. She did not save my fortune. She saved me. This document was void the moment I realized I could not breathe without her." Tears spilled over Beatrina's lashes. She squeezed his hands, her heart soaring into the gilded ceiling. Arturo turned back to the stunned crowd, his romantic vulnerability instantly snapping back into ruthless aristocratic power. He snapped his fingers. 2 burly men, Arturo's private investigators, stepped out from the shadows of the pillars, hauling 2 heavy iron lockboxes. "My marriage is none of your concern," Uncle Arturo snarled. "But your theft is the concern of the crown." Arturo unlocked the boxes, dumping hundreds of ledgers banknotes and intercepted telegrams onto the table before the trustees. "Here is the proof of Lord Benedict Montague's embezzlement," Arturo declared loudly. £12,000 stolen from the Yorkshire tenant farmers. Fraudulent accounts routed through Grosvenor Square, and here Arturo tossed a final piece of paper onto the pile, is the sworn confession of his manager Grimsby, detailing Benedict's plot to deliberately bankrupt the Harrington subsidiaries. Lord Westbourne's face turned purple with rage as he looked at the documents. He signalled to the London Metropolitan Police officers standing by the doors. "Benedict Montague." Lord Westbourne barked. "You are stripped of your position on this board, and you will answer to Scotland Yard for this." Benedict paled his triumphant smirk, collapsing into sheer terror. "No, Arturo, please. We are family. I have no uncle," Arturo said coldly, turning his back on the screaming man as the police dragged him away. Genevieve, realizing the ship had sunk, vanished into the crowd like a ghost. The ballroom erupted into chaotic chatter, but Arturo and Beatrina existed in a silent bubble of their own making. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "Take me home, Arturo," Beatrina whispered against his ear. "Take me to our room, together." Later that night, in the sprawling master suite of their Mayfair townhome, there were no contracts, no ledgers, and no shadows. The fire cast a warm, golden glow over the tangled silk sheets. Arturo held his wife against his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of her heart. The cold Duke had finally melted, finding his greatest treasure not in the sprawling railways or the deep vaults of London, but in the fierce, brilliant woman sleeping safely in his arms. Did you love this dramatic tale of betrayal, power, and unexpected romance? If Arturo and Beatrina's journey from a cold contract to a passionate, unbreakable bond kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. Share this story with your friends who love a fierce, intelligent heroine and a brooding duke who falls impossibly hard. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more breathtaking historical romance stories every single week. See you next time.